We met on the beach when he rescued my drone. I had just launched it to capture the breathtaking sunset over the waves, but a sudden gust of wind sent it spiraling into the water. My heart sank as I watched my expensive gadget disappear beneath the surface. Just as I was about to give up, a guy nearby sprinted toward the shoreline and dived into the waves. I stood frozen, barely able to process what was happening as he resurfaced, holding my soaked drone in his hands. He waded back to shore, water streaming from his clothes, and handed me the dripping device. "You might need to dry it out, but it should be fine," he said, flashing a reassuring smile. I thanked him profusely, still stunned by his quick reflexes. He introduced himself as Jake, an engineer who loved tinkering with gadgets. When I told him I was sure the drone was ruined, he chuckled and said he could probably fix it. Skeptical but intrigued, I agreed to let him take a look. As we sat on the sand, he carefully examined the drone, explaining how water damage could be minimized if handled correctly. His enthusiasm was contagious, and I found myself completely engrossed in the conversation. I learned he specialized in electronics and had even built his own custom drones. His passion for technology was evident, and I couldn't help but admire how effortlessly he explained complex things in a way that made sense to me. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over us as we talked. Time slipped away as we shared stories about our hobbies, favorite places to visit, and childhood memories. I realized that I hadn't felt this comfortable with someone in a long time. There was something about his easygoing nature and genuine kindness that made me want to keep talking to him forever. Before I knew it, I was laughing at one of his witty remarks, feeling completely at ease. Eventually, he said he'd take the drone home and see if he could repair it. I hesitated for a moment, but his confident smile reassured me. "Trust me, I've done this before," he promised. I handed it over, hoping for the best. We exchanged numbers, and as I watched him walk away, I realized I was already looking forward to hearing from him again. The night breeze was cool against my skin, but my heart felt unexpectedly warm. The next day, he sent me a message with a picture of the drone, dry and seemingly intact. "Good news. I think I can save it. Want to meet up so I can show you?" My stomach did a little flip as I typed back a quick yes. We met at a small CF near the beach, where he proudly demonstrated the drone's restored functionality. I was beyond impressed, not just by his skills, but by how much effort he had put into helping me. As the days passed, we found more reasons to see each other. At first, it was just about the drone, but soon we were meeting for coffee, walks on the beach, and late night talks about everything and nothing. What started as a chance encounter became something deeper. The more I got to know him, the more I realized how much I enjoyed being around him. His kindness, intelligence, and sense of humor were impossible to resist. Now, looking back, I can't believe how a lost drone led me to someone so special. Jake and I are together, and every time we watch a sunset, I remember the day we met. Life is funny that way sometimes. A small mishap can lead to something amazing. And to this day, I joke that losing my drone was the best thing that ever happened to me. We met in a bookshop when we reached for the same book at the same time. It was a rare edition, one that I had been searching for years. Our hands brushed against each other, and we both froze, startled by the coincidence. Looking up, I met a pair of equally surprised eyes. "You've been looking for this too?" I asked, hesitant but intrigued. "For ages," they admitted with a smile. That moment sparked a conversation that neither of us wanted to end. We discovered that we adored the same author, and it felt like fate had orchestrated our meeting. The bookshop, with its warm lighting and the scent of old pages, became the perfect setting for our first real conversation. We debated our favorite novels, shared recommendations, and laughed over obscure literary jokes only true fans would understand. Time slipped away, and neither of us noticed how the hours passed in the quiet, cozy corner of the store. Instead of arguing over who should take the book home, we made a pact. We would buy it together and take turns reading it. It was an unusual arrangement, but it felt right. The excitement of sharing something so precious with a stranger-turned-friend was unlike anything I had experienced before. We left the bookstore together, each holding onto the book, but also to a newfound connection that neither of us had expected when we walked in that day. Our first reading session happened at a small CAF nearby. With cups of coffee in hand, we took turns reading passages aloud, analyzing the intricate storytelling that had drawn us to the book in the first place. Our discussion flowed effortlessly, as if we had known each other forever. Each page we turned deepened our bond, and with every chapter, I felt more certain that meeting them was no coincidence, it was meant to be. As days turned into weeks, we continued our literary journey together. It wasn't just about one book anymore. We introduced each other to new authors, swapped novels, and spent endless hours in bookstores, hunting for treasures. Our conversation stretched beyond books, delving into life, dreams, and fears. What started as a shared love for literature soon blossomed into something more profound, something I never saw coming. One evening, after finishing the book we first fought over, they handed it back to me. "You keep it," they said softly. "I think it belongs with you." I hesitated, touched by the gesture, but unwilling to part with something that had brought us together. "How about we keep it as ours?" I suggested. That night, we both realized that what we had was more than just a shared love for stories, it was a story of our own. Now, looking back, I marvel at how a single book led us to each other. That rare edition sits on our shared bookshelf, a reminder of the day fate decided to bring two book lovers together. We still visit that bookstore often, still reach for the same books at the same time, and still laugh at how it all began. Love, like literature, has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Every chapter of our relationship has been filled with wonder, just like the stories we cherish. And just like in books, the best parts are yet to come. Who would have thought that a simple trip to the bookshop would turn into the greatest love story of my life? We met in a lift that got stuck. I had just finished a long meeting and was eager to get home when the elevator shuddered to a stop between floors. At first, I thought it was just a brief delay, but when the lights flickered and the emergency alarm failed to respond, I realized we might be stuck for a while. Next to me stood a girl, equally surprised and slightly panicked. We exchanged awkward glances, neither of us sure what to say. Minutes passed in silence, the air growing heavier with each second. Eventually, I decided to break the tension. "Guess we're stuck here for a bit," I said, attempting a weak smile. She let out a nervous laugh and nodded. "Yeah, looks like it." We started talking to distract ourselves, sharing our mutual frustration over the situation. Soon, the awkwardness faded, replaced by an easy conversation that made the small, confined space feel less suffocating. It turned out she worked in the same building, just a few floors above mine. I had never seen her before, yet we discovered we had plenty in common. We laughed about the absurdity of the situation, swapping stories about odd office encounters and our least favorite tasks at work. The more we talked, the more comfortable I felt, and I realized I was actually enjoying the unexpected company. Time seemed to blur as we got to know each other. She told me about her love for traveling, and I shared my obsession with classic films. We debated the best places to grab coffee nearby, and even found out we had a mutual friend. What started as an inconvenience slowly turned into a rare moment of connection. It was strange, really, how an unlucky event had led to such an easy, natural conversation between two strangers. After what felt like an eternity, the lift jolted back to life, and a voice crackled through the speaker, assuring us that help was on the way. Relief washed over us, but at the same time, I felt a slight pang of disappointment. "Well, I guess our adventure is almost over," she joked. I grinned. "Yeah, but at least we got a good story out of it." The doors finally slid open, and we stepped out, both hesitating as if reluctant to part ways so soon. As we walked toward the lobby, she turned to me and smiled. "You know, I wouldn't mind getting stuck in a lift again if it meant good company like this." I laughed, feeling the same way. We exchanged numbers, promising to grab that coffee we had talked about. It felt surreal how easily we had clicked, as if fate had decided we needed to meet that day, in that unlikely place. Over time, our coffee meetups became regular, and before we knew it, we had built a friendship that felt effortless. We often joked about our lift moment, laughing at how such an inconvenient situation led to something unexpectedly great. Looking back, I wouldn't change a thing about that day. Getting trapped had turned into one of the best things that ever happened to me. Now, whenever I step into that lift, I smile at the memory. It's our favorite story to tell, one that always gets a reaction. Some might say fate has a strange way of bringing people together, and I'd have to agree. After all, if that lift had never gotten stuck, I might have never met the person who has become such an important part of my life. We met at the airport when our flights were delayed. I had been prepared for a short wait, but when the announcement came that my flight was delayed by 8 hours, I groaned in frustration. Looking around for a way to kill time, I wandered into a small CAF near my gate. Every table was full except for one where a stranger sat scrolling through their phone. With a polite nod, I asked if I could sit, and they gestured for me to join them without hesitation. As we sat there in shared boredom, I decided to break the silence. Long delay? I asked, sipping my coffee. They sighed and nodded. 8 hours. You? I chuckled. Same here. Seems like we're stuck for a while. That simple exchange turned into a conversation about our travel plans, and we soon discovered we were headed to the same city. It felt oddly comforting to find someone in the same situation, making the wait less unbearable. We started talking about our reasons for traveling, sharing stories about past trips and unexpected adventures. It turned out we had both visited some of the same places and even had similar bucket lists. As the minutes turned into hours, the frustration of waiting faded, replaced by an easy flow of laughter and shared anecdotes. The airport, once a place of monotony, became the setting for an unexpected connection. At some point, they suggested we explore the terminal together, turning our delay into an impromptu adventure. We browsed souvenir shops, critiqued overpriced merchandise, and even made a game of spotting the most ridiculous travel accessories. It was the most fun I had ever had at an airport, and I found myself wishing the delay would last just a little longer. I never thought waiting could be this enjoyable. Eventually, hunger set in, and we decided to grab dinner. Over plates of airport food that was far too expensive for what it was, we continued our conversation. We talked about our favorite books, movies, and the little things that made us happy. By the time we finished eating, it felt like we had known each other for years. It was strange and exhilarating how easily we clicked, as if we were meant to meet that day. When the final boarding announcement came, reality hit us. We had spent nearly 8 hours together, yet it felt like no time at all. I guess this is it, they said with a small smile. I hesitated before replying. Or maybe just the beginning. There was a brief pause before they handed me their phone. Put your number in. Let's not leave this up to fate alone. I grinned and did just that. As we boarded the plane, we ended up seated just a few rows apart. Every so often, we'd catch each other's eyes and smile, as if sharing a secret that no one else knew. The delay had brought us together, and the journey ahead suddenly felt more exciting than ever. I had no idea where this connection would lead, but I knew I didn't want it to end when we landed. Now, looking back, I can't believe how a frustrating delay turned into something so meaningful. We're together now, and every time we pass an airport, we laugh about how fate, or perhaps a scheduling mishap, gave us our story. Some people hate flight delays, but for me, that day was the best layover of my life. We met at the zoo when she lost her sister. I was strolling past the enclosures when a girl approached me, her face filled with worry. Can you help me? I lost my little sister, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Without hesitation, I agreed, and together we started searching. As we walked through the zoo, calling out her sister's name, I couldn't help but notice how kind and determined she was. As we searched, we talked to keep our minds off the worst possibilities. She told me how much she and her sister loved animals, especially the giraffes. I shared stories of my childhood visits to the zoo, and we laughed over our mutual love for penguins. With every step, I learned more about her, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her family, her passion for adventure, and her warm, caring nature. We asked a zookeeper for help, and they reassured us that lost children were usually found quickly. Following their advice, we checked the play area near the petting zoo. As we approached, we suddenly heard giggling. There, behind a small wooden fence, was her sister, happily playing with a group of kids, completely unaware of the worry she had caused. Relief flooded her face as she ran to her sister, pulling her into a tight hug. Don't ever run off like that again, she scolded, though her voice held more love than anger. Her sister simply grinned up at me and said, "Did you help my sister find me?" I nodded, smiling back. "Then I guess you're our hero," she declared proudly. With her sister safe, we finally had time to slow down and talk. We grabbed some ice cream and continued wandering through the zoo, no longer searching, just enjoying each other's company. What had started as a stressful situation turned into one of the most enjoyable afternoons I had ever had. The more we talked, the more I felt a connection I hadn't expected. Before we left, she thanked me for my help. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she admitted. I shrugged, grinning. "I think you would have been just fine, but I'm glad I could help." She hesitated for a moment before asking, "Would you like to do this again sometime? Maybe under less panicked circumstances?" My heart raced as I quickly agreed. Since that day, We've spent countless afternoons together, at the zoo and beyond. Her sister often teases us, claiming she was the one who introduced us. You're welcome, she always says with a mischievous smile. Looking back, what began as a frantic search for a lost child turned into something neither of us could have predicted. Now, every time we visit the zoo, we laugh about how it all started. It's amazing how fate works, bringing people together in the most unexpected ways. What could have been just another day turned into the beginning of a love story, all thanks to a mischievous little girl and a shared adventure through the animal kingdom. We met in the hospital when we were both waiting for the results of the tests. I was sitting in the waiting area, my hands clenched together, trying to stay calm. The uncertainty was eating away at me when a girl sat down next to me. Noticing my tension, she started sharing funny stories about hospital visits, making me chuckle despite myself. Her warmth was like a distraction, easing the anxiety I hadn't realized had taken over. As we waited, we continued talking, finding comfort in each other's company. She told me how she had always been afraid of hospitals, but found ways to make herself laugh through the nerves. I admitted that I felt the same way. There was something oddly reassuring about knowing that someone else was experiencing the same emotions. It made the wait feel a little less daunting. Minutes turned into an hour, and neither of us had received our results yet. We talked about everything: our favorite movies, the books we loved, and the places we wanted to travel. What started as a simple distraction soon turned into an actual connection. The nervous energy faded as we lost ourselves in conversation, completely forgetting where we were for a while. At one point, she turned to me and said, "No matter what the results say, at least we got to meet today." I smiled, realizing how true that was. There was something special about finding comfort in a stranger when you needed it the most. It was a reminder that even in the most stressful moments, there were still unexpected joys waiting to be discovered. Finally, her name was called. She stood up, took a deep breath, and turned to me. "Wish me luck." I did, sincerely, hoping everything would be okay for her. A few minutes later, my name was called as well. As I walked toward the doctor's office, I realized that I wasn't as nervous anymore. Meeting her had changed something in me. When I came back, I saw her still sitting there, looking at me with a hopeful expression. "Everything okay?" she asked. I nodded, smiling. "Yeah, it's going to be fine." She let out a sigh of relief. Me too, in that moment. I knew that even if we had just met, this was not the last time we would see each other. We exchanged numbers before leaving, promising to stay in touch. What had started as a nerve-wracking morning turned into the beginning of something unexpected and beautiful. Sometimes fate brings people together in the strangest places, and I couldn't help but feel grateful for that waiting room encounter. Now, we often joke about how a stressful hospital visit led to something so meaningful. Every time we pass by that hospital, we smile at the memory. What could have been a lonely, anxious day turned into the start of a new chapter in our lives, proving that even in moments of uncertainty, there is always room for connection and hope.